Good morning. This is Kelly again on a lovely Thursday morning. It's getting darker on in the morning time, and thank you, daylight savings. Anyway, you can catch me the Thursday morning on Voluntary Virtues at 6:30 Eastern time, 6:30 Pacific time, or every Monday, my written word at globalwealthprotection.com. So today's big topic is education. And that's not to say that it hasn't been covered thoroughly by various other anarchists and other liberty-minded people, or even great people like John Taylor Gatto. But I just wanted to touch on it from a personal perspective, because I think that's, at the end of the day, there's only so many different theories you can come up with. But insights to how I see education playing itself out is just perspective, I guess. And you could throw perspective in with facts and probably formulate your own perspective, your own opinion, maybe out of that. And I was reminded recently on a thread on Facebook, because that's where the fodder comes from for this show. And I was reminded of a parent-teacher conference I had for my daughter at the time she was in first grade. And I had simply mentioned to her that homeschooling was an option. That was it. I hadn't really sold her on it. She really didn't have, we didn't talk about it. I only talked about it when she wanted to. But I did tell her that, that's an option. We could do all the homework here at home, study what it is you need to study on your pace, how you want to learn it. And, in terms of friends, we would just go to the park and find other homeschoolers, or I'd go online and find somebody. But, I said, there are people who do this, especially where we were living in Texas. And, she thought about it. I never came to fruition, of course. But before that, I had a parent-teacher conference. And, of course, the teacher was already prepped by my ex-husband on what he expected me to say, and thought I was telling my daughter. And so she came a bit defensive and ready to defend her bona fides as a teacher. And I knew already half the canned arguments I was going to hear. Still, I, indulged in. Look, I got nothing but time. Let's talk about it. My issue was that she didn't appreciate some of the tactics that the teacher was using. And so I said, look, it's, this is not working for her. I said, you're taking disciplinary action against her for things that are really quite trivial, and in the grand scheme of things, don't mean anything. I mean, if you're gonna take corrective action on something, or if you're gonna try and help her, wait till she actually needs help, and wait until it's about something that actually matters. But I mean, look, when I compare the fact that my daughter remembers more about how much she doesn't like your approach to pedagogy versus what you actually taught, then it shows where her attentions are, right? I mean, she had recently gotten disciplined because she was playing in class, and I don't know whether to think this is cute or sad, honestly. But she was playing with a broken rubber band that she had tied a knot in at the end to make a little head, and called it her pet worm, named it. I don't remember what she named it, but she named it. And there were other kids who were actually more interested in this rubber band of hers than anything the teacher had to say. And so I pointed this out to the teacher, and I said, you do understand that my daughter finds a broken rubber band with a knot in it to be far more enthralling than the material you're presenting, or at least how you're presenting it. I said, if you want feedback, that's your feedback. It doesn't matter what I think. I can't make her pay attention. I'm not gonna punish her for not paying attention. It's not my fault you're boring. I mean, if you're boring, you're boring. What do you want me to do? I can't make you exciting. That's your job, right? And I said, isn't that somewhat telling that no matter how many years of experience you have, at the end of the day, you can't engage this 7-year-old? You've had what? You're telling me you have 20 years experience teaching, and in that 20 years, you never once learned how to engage a child without the compulsion of their parent behind them? And she says, well, I can't do my job unless you help me. I said, if I have to help you read the cues of a 7-year-old, I said, then you don't know what your job is. You don't know how to do it. I said, the thing is that I'm very much for education. I'm just against schooling. So I said, if there's material you want her to learn, then I'd be happy to hear what your lesson plans are and what your curriculum is. And if I can somehow tie it into what we're doing at home, I'd be happy to try and reinforce, whatever message it is. But at the same time, I said, this has nothing to do with the material you're teaching. It has to do with how you teach it, it would seem, because she's disinterested. And she resents you for some of the things you're doing, like the way you try to correct her handwriting. I said, and she says, well, if she wants to get a well-paying job, she's going to have to learn to write legibly. I said, but I've seen her writing. I've seen the stuff that you've marked up. It's 100% legible. The fact that she interchanges her lower and uppercase letters is really of no moment and really of little consequence in the real world. I said, unless you're going to be a handwriting teacher, which I don't think that's where she's headed. So, and she says, well, she needs it to be successful. And I said, well, that's patently untrue because her father writes like a troll and makes more money than you'll ever see in a lifetime. So do most doctors. So do many lawyers. Now, I mean, I'm not advocating that she become any of those things, but certainly people have found workarounds in terms of how to manage poor handwriting. And handwriting is slowly becoming obsolete in the sense that, most of our things are done now on computers, typed out. And so I don't really know how relevant this is and why you're being such a stickler about it. She can write. She can write her letters. And so we had this conversation, and I said, and so she says, well, perhaps you need to start encouraging her, that school is a place of learning rather than promoting your homeschooling thing. And I said, well, school is only a place of learning if you make it one. So that's not my job to sell it. That's your job to sell it. I'm not going to sell her on something that's not happening at this institution, this overglorified prison. I'm not with little artistic pieces of construction paper decorating the hallways being the only distinguishing factor between here and the county jail. No, I'm not going to sell her on this. But I'm also not selling her on homeschooling. I'm asking her how she learns best, and I'm willing to use whatever approach is necessary to make the information stick, right? So I said, you do understand that she's not comparing your class to homeschooling. She's never been homeschooled. She has no idea what homeschooling entails. She's comparing your class to her kindergarten teacher and her kindergarten experience that took place not more than 50 feet down the hall. She's comparing you to another colleague of yours at the same institution. So now what? And I said she liked her approach better. She liked the interactive approach better than the pedantic one. And she says, well, it's only going to get worse from here. It becomes more lecture-based as they get older. I said, and you don't find anything wrong with that? Because the kids clearly do. At least mine does. I said, so if that approach is a turnoff to the kids, perhaps you should reevaluate the use of interactive groups and projects, since they respond better in a peer setting as opposed to just sitting there being lectured at. And she says, well, that's not my call. I have to teach her certain things. And I said, I understand that. I said, which in turn shows me what your priorities are. Because as a parent, my priority is my kid. As the teacher, your first priority is your job. Your second priority is to make your class overall perform well. And your third priority is to address the stragglers. So you don't get down to the individual level until several notches down your priority list. That I'm only concerned with one individual in this classroom, and that's my kid. I don't give a shit about the other kids in this classroom. I don't care if you keep your job. That's not even on my priority. It's not even a lower priority. It's just not even there on the list. Now, I would love for my child to learn, but I want her to learn what she wants to learn when she's ready to learn it. So I'm willing to listen to that. In the end, at 18, she'll have learned everything she needs to. But if she's not feeling like learning math that day, then we're learning something else. But I feel like I can make math far more exciting outside the classroom. That was the only thing. And I said, honestly, I don't think it takes that much to do your job. And it's not to say that, I don't appreciate you watching my kid and make sure she doesn't get hurt every day, or that, you would try to present things that are somewhat educational in nature. I said, but it's all state prescribed. It has nothing to do with what my kid wants or needs at this stage in her life. It's a cookie cutter program. And, you try to dress it up as nicely as possible. And that's, I think, the greatest impasse of most public schools is that, one, they teach what they're told. Two, they don't question what they teach. They don't. I mean, if they did, then I wouldn't have been taught in a public school that Lincoln was some sort of hero, right? I wouldn't have been taught that FDR fixed the Great Depression. So the fact is that the teachers don't even know the facts. They don't question what they teach. And I told her that. I said, you don't even question what you teach. She says, I know exactly what I teach. I said, really? That's interesting. I said, you're about to teach my daughter the Pledge of Allegiance. You don't find that to be just slightly outside the scope of a 6-year-old? First of all, taking vows and making promises to a national symbol. I mean, you don't cover symbolism until like middle school. How the hell does a 6-year-old wrap their head around the fact that they're standing there making a promise? Making a promise, that unto itself is a lesson that has yet to be fully imbued in their mind, right? Much less understand what the word allegiance means. She doesn't know what a republic is. I mean, and you're going to teach this. You're going to make her recite it without understanding the words and the concepts. You're going to make her recite it, and she's going to say it over and over and over for years before it actually makes any sense, at which point it's not going to make sense. You don't even know what it means, I'll bet. And she kind of just rolled her eyes, which is true. She probably doesn't. If she did, she'd be able to explain it to me, but she has no idea. In any case, but this is public school, right? That They want to doctor up, I mean, even further. They want to doctor up now in a school district in Denver. I think it was either Jefferson County School District. Um, they want to soften even more the American history lessons by omitting uh, anything to do with civil disobedience, which means that we just don't study the Revolutionary War altogether. You just don't study the Boston Tea Party at all. And you don't study the Civil Rights Movement at all. You just don't. We don't even study Harriet Tubman anymore, right? Is that, I mean, because, I mean, all the acts of civil disobedience has come to light in, because of things like Ferguson, or just by virtue of YouTube being around, because, I mean, it's not to say that Ferguson is a one-off. Police brutality has been an issue for decades, but only now through technology and through the pervasiveness of social media do we see how much is really happening. No longer can you sleep under the rock and say that, oh, that's just a bad apple. That argument doesn't work when you have access to all this video and people are downloading Bambuser and having live feeds from protests. So this, so Ferguson, then you have what happened in Scotland, right? Reintroducing the word secession into mainstream discussions now. Now, at one point, the word secession was normal. Right? That was the founding of this country, was based on secession. Then it kind of got swept under the rug so as to focus on building nationalism and patriotism and this, this camaraderie of countrymen. And then the word secession slowly became marginalized and a term of the fringe and the radicals. Right? But now it's reintroduced back into mainstream discussions. Even if it's to oppose it, it doesn't matter. The point is that the word secession is now circulating. And government schools have to contend with these things. They have to contend with things like secession, with civil disobedience, with with these large-scale protests, be it the Occupy movement or the Tea Party movement, or even the protests of the abuse in Ferguson. You have polls coming out saying that there are just about as many Americans, percentage-wise, are for some form of secession as were Scots who voted for secession. About 45% have some favorable opinion of the idea of secession in some form in the United States. And government schools have to address this in some way. They can't just not talk about it. Unless, of course, you take it out of the discussion altogether. Right? Unless you adjust your curriculum to no longer address any issue that has to do with civil disobedience, secession, independence, anything like that. At some point, though, you begin to turn the United States into some mythological place that doesn't really exist. I mean, the United States has a very gory history of imperialism and brutality. So when you take out all the rough edges, you don't have much left other than to sing the praises of every president, to remind the students that every president is great, every war is justified in the name of freedom, and this is slowly becoming what a history class sounds like. What a social studies class sounds like is basically an hour of indoctrination of how great your country is and how bad other countries are. Right? And unfortunately, the kids don't know to challenge it. And it's become so politicized that the challenges that do get presented have more to do with conservative versus liberal than it does, about what the government actually has done. At no point are we actually talking about the truth of our government. We're talking about seeing the government through a certain political lens. And that's unacceptable. How should we palette our government? Should we accept and embrace our government through a liberal lens, or should we accept and embrace our government through a conservative lens? But at no point did anybody say, should we reject our government altogether? That's not left up to the decision. That's not up to the child. Right? That's not up to the child, because there's no such thing as objective presentation of information. So, whereas had real information been presented, real objective information about American history been presented, we'd have at least learned about the Anti-Federalist Papers. If you're lucky, you were told about the Federalist Papers. If you're lucky. But only somebody who would go out, either a homeschooled child or a autodidact, would find out that there were Anti-Federalist Papers. And that the Anti-Federalist Papers warned that we would become much like Scotland 230 years ago. We might have advanced as a society with technology, but we've regressed in terms of liberty, in terms of freedom. That movement is cyclically in our systems, but only because government never knows how to limit itself. It pushes people too far. It explodes in a revolution, and then a new despot takes the reins. What people don't learn is that there is no way in which you can govern large swaths of people without oppressing them. Unless, of course, you're selling them young on bullshit oral tradition about American history and about world history, about government in general. And to get starry-eyed about how I'm going to make a difference, I'm going to run for president one day, there's nothing exciting and there's nothing commendable about this. That people would want to seek public office at such a young age. What they're saying is, I want to be on welfare in a suit. I hope one day I can be so indoctrinated by your system that I can join the welfare doles and pretend like I'm helping people. Just like the teachers that are there. Just like the police officers that come in on career day. Just like the city councilmen, the state and local legislatures, the mayors and the governors, all the regulators, all y'all thinking that you're doing something special because you were pumped full of bullshit when you were a kid that said that this was somehow noble. But if everybody took this noble government job, who would pay for the job? Right? Nobody thinks about that. Nobody teaches that. Nobody addresses economics in schools. So these kids go from asking for permission to take a piss until they're 18 to being thrown out in the open. They're encouraged to get hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. Also that they could get a 4-year degree that doesn't mean jack shit, because no one wants to nobody wants to encourage anybody to consider getting certified in some way in a trade. Tradesmen are looked down upon. I don't know why. They make a fuck ton more than most white-collar workers. Blue-collar work in general is looked down upon, and I don't know why. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day saying, what's the difference between me handling a multi-million dollar account and shuffling papers and sending off emails and creating charts for them and a person handling a multi-million dollar machine? At the end of the day, if either of us fuck up, we jeopardize having the multi-million dollar thing at our disposal. Some mistakes can be fixed rather easily on the back end, and others will cost you the multi-million dollar thing in question. But we don't educate with any particular goal in mind, it would seem. I'm not seeing kids coming out of schools driven to be anything. Like, I'm not seeing that. Because, obviously we've taken shop classes out, right? I mean, art shouldn't be a class. Art should be integrated into every class that you take because art is involved in everything. But instead, they want to make it a separate class and then eliminate the class. Music should be incorporated into various history classes, but isn't. Because music has been around throughout history, there should be some study of it in history classes. It's not. So instead, it's sequestered off as being its own class and then eliminated. The football team is doing great. And I'm not opposed to physical education or exercise. I think that's important. I mean, by all means, these kids need to work off the pig swill they're fed in the cafeterias. But at the same time, not everybody's on the football team. So this isn't about all kids getting exercise. It's about 15 kids getting exercise. And then the others watching them get exercise. So as I see these quorums, getting together to decide what's going to go into the books next and what's going to be taught and what's not going to be taught and how it should be approached, if at all, right? I don't even know why we bother with the pretense of sending them to school anymore. And still, I see the left clamoring for school. And still, I hear about people clamoring about how we have this money for F-15s, but we don't have the money to spend on kids. We're spending hundreds of thousands, millions and billions of dollars on this weaponry, but we only spend $10,000 a year per child on schools. What do you mean we only spend $10,000 a year? Take the F-15 out of the picture. I don't want to spend trillions of dollars on education. It's not necessary. That is patently unnecessary. A private school pumps out better product for less per year than public schools. It's not the money that's the problem. It's the approach to pedagogy. It's the approach to teaching. That's why Waldorf schools and Montessori schools fare better than other private schools because their model is better. And then private schools do better than public schools because their tolerance for bullshit is lower. And public schools just will take whatever's left. And then you're just stuck with a substandard state-issued education. I can't even call it education because that would mean that there were some facts involved. But you're teaching watered down, backwards math that I can't even wrap my head around that shit. I don't know how my kids expect it to. So you're setting them up to fail and get frustrated because everybody's supposed to learn this one way, and when they don't, you drug them. How is this no different? I mean, how is this any different than a mental ward? You know, this isn't education anymore. And then everybody says, why do I support public education? Because I want an educated group of people voting and participating in society. Well, if that's the case, then the last thing you should be advocating is public education, much less nationalizing college education. Everybody's cheering for Germany because they've just recently decided that, there shouldn't be any tuition tied to university. So now you're just going to continue with the mediocre curriculum? When people pay for their education, they give a shit. When people don't pay for it, they drop out. It's ridiculous. Anyway, this is a rather somber and sad take on education, but at the same time, I think it's quite honest and quite accurate. It's food for thought, and it's certainly something that can start some conversations with your neighbors. Probably rustle a few jimmies in the process. Anyway, have a great week, and I'll catch you next week. Take it easy. Bye.